Oh,
All right,
okay.
good evening. We are very honored tonight to have with us on our weekly special guests. This week, Rabbi Baruch Hecht from Yeshiva Tiferes Bechurim. So Rabbi Hecht, first of all, thank you so much for taking time. We just had a chasana last night and a Sheva Brachas tomorrow, but he squeezed us in and we're really appreciative. So thank you very much. And give us a little background. What is Tiferes Bechurim? What do those words mean? What is the backstory of the Yeshiva Tiferes Bechurim, if the history can be shared with us? And
Sure.
What are the clientele? What's it like?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for this great honor. So my boss is Rabbi Moshe Herson Shlita, the head shliach of New Jersey, who himself became a Baal Tshuva at a young age after the famous Rabbi Weinberg of blessed memory, who was the one who wrote the original lessons in Tanya, which started
His
in
two
Yiddish.
grandsons in Chicago.
Oh, yes. Actually, this Rabbi Shmuley once brought his grandfather to Fabring with Rabbi Herson for all the Bachrim side by side. To me, that was a very historic moment. But so what happened was Rabbi Weinberg had visited Brazil, and he convinced Rabbi Herson's mother to allow him to bring him back with him to New York to go to the Rebbe, to go to Yeshiva. And Rabbi Herson was very much niskarev to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was makarev him very much. And at one point, he became the leader of the yeshiva, which was then in Newark. And then in 1971, they moved to the Morristown facilities. And in 1972, he had this idea of opening a yeshiva for Bali Tshuva. So he asked the Rebbe if it would be okay to do this idea. And the Rebbe gave him a parev, or very little of an answer, which was unusual for him in his relationship with the Rebbe as it went. And so he wasn't sure what to do, but he kept on working on it. And there was a lot of resistance from the Frum community, from the Chabad community, because they were worried, how could you have these Bali Tshuva? How do you have these guys who are so not religious in the very same school as our very own precious Chabad boys? That will be a terrible influence. So he had to juggle with trying to keep the clientele of the Lubavitcher Yeshiva happy and comfortable. He said, don't worry, I'll keep them separate. They'll eat in a separate dining room. And at the same time, he had this inner struggle because the Rebbe wasn't responding to his reports, which he seemed like the Rebbe was making room for it, but the Rebbe wasn't responding. Finally, it took a year of him going through this struggle, which he speaks about often. And he gave him a duch about what's going on, and the Rebbe responded very positively. He says perhaps the Rebbe wanted to see if he can do this on his own. In other words, if it didn't need to be pushed by the Rebbe, if he was able to persevere. It has to be an asirus de la sata, an arousal from below. And finally, the Rebbe said, if it had been a yeshiva in the old country, I would have called it Tiferes Bechurim. That was the name that the underground yeshivas had in Russia for those who couldn't learn Torah, who had to learn secretly. So just to fast forward a bit, we had a gentleman living in town here. He moved to Florida. And he grew up in the former Soviet Union. His name is Rabbi Zalman Sirota. And he explained that when he got out, he would learn secretly in Russia with his grandfather, who was a chassid. When he finally got out, his grandfather was another chassid. He himself was Lubavitcher, this young man. When he finally went to Yechidus with the Rebbe gave him a bracha that may all the years that you missed, not able to learn, may you be able to make it all up. It should not be a detriment to you. And he shared that at a Fabrengen with our Bachrim, and I thought that was super appropriate because that's one of the main concerns a lot of people have as they become religious later in life. How can they make up all of the lost time? Of course, we know that it's not at all an issue, and they get way ahead of many, if not all, of the others.
So 1972, here we are, almost 2022, 50 years later.
Yeah.
Can you give us like some numbers? How many yeshiva students started in 1972? How many do you have now? And is there a count of a rough number of approximately, can I know how many students have gone through the Tiferes Bechurim program?
That's a great question. I can't imagine that I don't know for sure, although I've met some of the students from then. I can't imagine that they started with more than 1 million of guys. The campus wasn't very developed. They had the huge floors. Maybe some of the listeners, I don't know who's on, who was there then, but they had a big floor and they didn't even have rooms. They called it the bowling alley because it was just this huge fun. They put beds, and there were a lot of things which were very rough. I think one of the early people were Rabbi Tuvia Teldin.
We've had him on. He was a guest on a Wednesday night. Actually, at Long Island. We had him on.
Yeah, he's great. He's great. He spoke to our Bacher more than once about what it was like in the early years then. Now we have, I would say 45 full-time students, but we have a lot of students who come as visitors. So if we were to, like this past Shabbos, there were some 30 visitors just for a Shabbaton. So it's hard to judge because we also have the summer program for just a 1 week experience and a winter program for 1 week. There's various Shabbatons. But let's say if we take the number, I don't know, 50, 50 times 50, right?
2,500.
That's a lot of students.
Can I know?
So that's a lot. And there are a lot of students who pass through. I mean, we had once a group of 3 students from Montreal, and when they came for 1 week, and the shliach in Montreal asked, this was maybe between 5 and 10 years ago. The shliach said to me, "What did you do to these guys?" I said, "Unfortunately, nothing. They barely showed up." They barely showed up. He said to me, he says, "Yes, but I said, "I don't know, but I'll tell you what, they're coming to shul now all the time. They don't miss a class. They don't miss anything." One boy even went ahead and married a girl from Beis Rivka. Like so what happens is, I look at bringing people to yeshiva as the equivalent today of bringing people to the Rebbe's Farbrengen. And some people say, you can't bring everyone to yeshiva. And I say, that's not true. Everyone belongs in yeshiva. Some people for an hour, some people for a year. And it's by divine design. A yeshiva is as old as the Torah, and it's very important, and it affects people in an amazing way.
So is there any sort of generalization you can give us about approximately, like, what is the age group that Tiferes caters to? Where do these students, these men come from? Are they from the United States? Are they from all over the world? What is their fluency when they first show up? Can they read Hebrew? Have they studied the Chumash? Have they studied Talmud? Is there a way you can give us at least a rough estimate as to what they used to look like?
The average age might be 22. We start at maybe it's 18 to 28, although there are exceptions. We do have a younger division now called Ateres, where we're trying to take boys who are 17 and 18, give them some extra attention and work with them. And I just got off the phone today with a gentleman who's 50 years old who wants to come to yeshiva. And although I told him I don't think it would be appropriate for you to be a roommate with a guy who's 20, but hey, why don't you come for a couple of days? He's coming from Delaware. I said, hey, come for a couple of days. We worked out all the details. And what was very, very fascinating and truly uplifting was that his recommendation came out of Israel. And so it was a guy he happens to learn with. And this guy is a Litvische, he's a Litvische Mechaber Svarim. So I looked him up right away.
A prominent author.
A prominent author. And he says to me, I learned in Morristown. And he goes on to tell me about his connections. And it's amazing about the impact that a yeshiva can have on people.
So a student shows up, he's 19, 20 years old. He grew up in the public school system of America. Maybe he went to Hebrew school. Does he have to know how to read Hebrew? Does he have to have a familiarity or an entrance exam? What's it like for a student who shows up in an environment how new is it to him? And what are some of the struggles that you've noticed with students who make this commitment?
It's a shock. It's a shock for people. I try to warn them, but I understand that it's truly shocking, because what happens in a Chabad house is the ruach level, the level of embrace is so powerful that people are caught off guard with the level of warmth and beauty, because they're also just coming in for a short visit. But when a person enters yeshiva, they call it an immersion program, and it is immersion because they feel people get frightened. They get frightened, but it's what it says. Hashem is a consuming fire. So kind of my job is to put out the fire, to try to get a guy to come. And yesterday, I slapped the guy in the back. I'm like, yo, buddy, you got to take a walk. You just got to take you. He's like, I don't have any time. I don't have any time. I'm busy learning. But he needed a walk. He just needed a walk. So I said, look, do me a favor. Come with me. We're going on a little walk. Sometimes I'll take a guy out to the woods. It's very intense. And it's one of the challenges. And it's not to blame them. But I'll tell you about a conversation I had with someone this afternoon. And he's a gentleman in Canada who's working for a bank. And he's become more religious. He's in his mid-20s. And the rabbi gave him a book. I think it's called, I can't remember, it's a book about basics of Judaism. It's like almost like a Kitzur Shulchan Aruch in English. In any event, he came back to the rabbi 2 weeks later, said, I read it twice. And he gave the bank notice that he's going to leave because they make him work on Friday nights. He does fraud detection. And he says, I want to learn. So I called his rabbi a little frantic. I'm like, here the guy is going from 0 to 613 overnight. Is it safe? So he described the individual. I interviewed him. And I said, look, let's say you'll show up here in 2 weeks. By the time you finish everything, do me a favor, do a crash course in Hebrew reading. It's not about translating. While we can accept someone who doesn't read the Aleph Bet, it would be very helpful if you could at least, if the rabbi's reading, you could know the text, where we are on the page, and that you can do on your own. So that's the...
So the yeshiva student shows up. What is the faculty like? What's the student? I mean, how many faculty? What is the sort of background that the faculty specifically has for dealing with perhaps non-traditional students, as you're describing, or someone who's only coming for a couple of weeks? What is that like?
So the main, I happened to see it today in a mimer that the Avram Avinu was considered a great astrologer, and kings from the east and the west would come to his door for advice. And one of the interpretations is because he was learned in the Torah, and of course we know a Talmud Chacham is given the power of the Torah to connect with the world. So I wouldn't say, I would say that our greatest, the greatest value of our faculty is not necessarily that they've traveled the world and experienced everything, but as much as they are caring and loving and very knowledgeable Talmidei Chachamim, between Rabbi Dubinsky and Rabbi Brofman and Rabbi Wagner, these are just towering Talmidei Chachamim who would be Torah scholars anywhere. Rabbi Dick has a little more of a flowery Baal Teshuva story, as he himself was a investment banker and a black belt kickboxing fighter of sorts, and he lived overseas and he lived in Japan, and he had all sorts of experiences until Chabad reeled him in, and he decided to pursue his excellence in smicha.
Kickboxing can come in handy if any of the students start to get a little rowdy.
I've had a fair share in experiences with that.
Oh, those sound like interesting stories. Rabbi goes kung fu on some students.
Yeah, I'll share some. Now I'm okay. That's it. I'm done. Now I'll just go to fun stories just for fun.
Well, let's start with one story, which is, what is your story? How did you become involved in this? How did this become your way to fulfill the Rebbe's mission to make the world a place ready for Mashiach?
Okay, so good. So my father's a shliach in Lomita, California. And since I was a little boy, he would stop me and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar. But I knew the truth. I really wanted to be a shliach. They're not contradictory necessarily, but I knew I wanted to be a shliach. So after I got married, I started looking into my options. I had an option in California, I had an option in Wisconsin, other options. I went to the shluchim office, and they give you 20 things, boxes, options. I ticked off every single one except for education. I was not interested in becoming a teacher. I would do a community, the seniors, the youth, whatever, something. But then we ended up coming back to Morristown for a Shabbos, and I'd been here as a student. And as a student, when I was learning smicha, I would get stuck. It's very difficult concepts and all of the Shulchan Aruch and 100 opinions. So when I would get stuck, I would go downstairs from the upstairs yeshiva. I'd look through the glass doors and see these guys learning Hebrew, Gemara, Shulchan Aruch, Chassidus, and they didn't grow up with any of it. And they were learning and learning and learning. And I would say to myself time and again, if these guys can do it, I can do it. And I'd go right back and continue learning. And so that was a good start. And then they said, hey, you want to come here? And I was like, this is not just an educational institution. This is not a school. This is a brotherhood. I want this. So that's how when the opportunity came, I said, you bet. So that's how
long have you been working there? How long have this been your life?
Ooh, it's been 18 years.
Wow.
But before that, I was here as a student. So I feel like I've been here for over 20.
So what can you lay out for us as some of the biggest challenges, and what are some of the biggest rewards of this particular work that you're doing with these students who are in their first formal Jewish study program, perhaps of their whole life?
So the biggest challenge is, like what I mentioned to you before, is that people are going through such a strong change in their life that it is emotionally and perhaps spiritually taxing. So that's kind of where I come in. I told a parent once, I said, your son's job is to keep me religious. Because when you see these guys becoming religious, it's a wake-up call for me, at least for me. I need a wake-up call. So I see these guys becoming religious and trusting the Torah. It tells me, oh, someone believes it. Maybe I should. But my job is, I told this to the parent, he loved it. I said, your son keeps me religious, I keep him normal. And, and so that's how we have a good partnership.
So COVID shows up 18 months ago. The whole world reacts to it differently. What happened in the yeshiva? Can you bring us back to March 2020 and just walk us through what happened and where are you now? Are you still dealing with it? Is the yeshiva back up and running? This project that we're doing now started with COVID, and we've kept it going. How did that change Tiferes Bechurim?
So first, we didn't believe it was going to happen. A parent called me and said, what happened? They're closing some schools. I said, nah, nonsense. And then, of course, we actually had to close. And so just to share something personal. So what happened was, as everything closed down, and there was nowhere to go and nothing to do, I usually daven. I have usually davened in the early minyan. In Chicago, it's not early, but for us, it's 6:45. I know you guys have all sorts of early morning stuff. But but I'm waking up later and later. I'm like, okay, Kriya Shema, but it's like, I was like, what's going on? So at some point, I said, I reached out to a ton of people. I said, hey, who wants a Chassidus class? Luckily, I ended up doing for 5 months. Nothing major, but 8 to 8:30. We did Chassidus for 5 months straight, 6 days a week, with a group of random students and alumni, small group, a handful of guys, anywhere between 2 to 8 people. We're joined from Brazil to Finland, from a few guys in California would wake up at 5 a.m. for it. And it was a very beautiful thing. Then we did once a week in classes for beginners. Then we had all the classes finally started up on Zoom when the whole world became Zoom experts. But I think the religious world and the yeshiva world kind of sprung back to normal much quicker than the rest of the world. And even when we had last year, the high holidays, we had a special ward. We had a special ward, the COVID ward. They had a whole COVID high holiday service for all the boys with COVID. But Baruch Hashem, we're back to running normal.
Oh, wow. So people are watching, they're listening, maybe they have a friend, a cousin themselves. They say, wow, I'd like to do this. I'd like to come for a week. I'd like to come for a month. I'd like to come for a year. Where do they go? You got to have a website. What do they do? Give us, how do we get in touch?
Okay, so our website is theworldsgreatestyeshiva.com. That's theworldsgreatestyeshiva.com. We may not be at the cutting edge of technology, but I will respond there. My job again is to greet the people. We have a special 1 week where we have a lot of introductory classes at the end of December, a special 1 week with a lot of introductory classes at the end of May. That's what works out best for students. And then we have some spontaneous weekends, like we had this past weekend. Some schools wanted to come together. And should a particular community want to come for a visit, we'll be happy to tailor a visit. Should an individual who can afford a semester of time in their life would like to come, they can get in touch with me. I'll be happy to help the individual. Should a person like to take a couple days off, I will tailor a program for that. I would like to mention why I think the yeshiva is, why I love this shlichus, and that is because the Rambam says that the pidyon shvuyin, to redeem a captive, is the greatest mitzvah, because a person should keep kosher and should keep Shabbos, but if they're in captivity, they can't do any of it. When you free a person from captivity, they can do everything. And I feel the same way about yeshiva. If you go out of Mitzrayim, you put tefillin on someone, that's awesome. You might bring Mashiach. That's you won.
That's pretty good.
But if you can, yeah, that's pretty good. But if you can get a guy to keep Shabbos, tefillin, kashrus, and everything else, that's what happens when a guy comes to yeshiva. The chance of that occurring is much greater than anywhere else on the planet. So that's why I love this. I would like to say that I regularly get a humongous pride when I see a student who may have come and was at a real beginner level. And I am accustomed to seeing people whiz right on by me, whether they become a huge Talmud Chacham, rabbi, businessman, whatever it is. In Chicago itself, we have a lot of leading community members who are graduates of Tiferes. As a matter of fact, a number of years ago, I was at a kinnis and I was at a workshop, and I turned to a senior shliach, Rabbi Shlomo Levi from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I said, Rabbi Levi, I'm looking around the room. Do you know how many guys here learned in Tiferes? He says to me, Boruch, I learned in Tiferes. I said, oh, I had no idea. That's amazing. And a lot of times, these people become a tremendous, and it's generations after generations. And perhaps I should share some fun stories.
We got a question here from the audience. You have room for a question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
My name is Nira. Your program sounds really interesting. Is it open only for men?
Right now, we only cater for men. There is a program in Crown Heights called Machon L'Yahadus. It is also a program for women. There's also a program run by Mrs. Hindalea Sharfstein, which does seasonal programming based Chana. So, and then of course there is a Chabad program for Bali Tshuva in Israel. There are multiple. There's the Machon Alta, and there may be other options as well. But unfortunately, we only cater for men at this time.
All right, Rabbi, give us one story to take us home.
Okay, so this story was that I got a call from a Rabbi Katz in Miami, and he said that he was doing business in China, and he says, so I met a gentleman who says he's a Kaifeng Jew. I said, what's that? So he explained to me that there were these Jewish merchants who went from the Middle East. They moved to do business in China, and they all married Chinese women, and there's really not much of a trace. But this guy traces himself to the Kaifeng Jews. And he put me on the phone with this guy who called himself Moshe Yan. And we had a nice conversation, but it didn't really go very far. But I got a call 2 weeks later from our back office. They said, Rabbi Hecht, are you expecting someone? And I said, no. They said, someone's here to see you from China. So all of a sudden, this guy, Moshe Yan, appeared. He wasn't joking around. So we have to do a giur l'chumra. We have to do just because he traced himself through his father, through Jews, but it wasn't clear if it came through his mother. In any event, he did learn in the yeshiva. He did do a proper conversion with Torah court. And then he later moved on and he did a lot of interesting things, including opening a kosher Chinese restaurant, including making, including later making various inventions. He showed me one day a sketch of his generator shofar turbine. It was based on a shofar-shaped turbine. And today he's part of a Chabad community in New Jersey. And he's just a fascinating person. And the stories go on and on and on. I didn't even touch on any of them. But the truth is, every one of us and everyone we can come in touch with is really a story. And this story is the great story that Hashem is writing. We are writing. Hashem is kind of narrating. And I wish you all the best of luck.
The world's best yeshiva, right? That's what it is?
No, the world's greatest yeshiva.
Greatest yeshiva. The world's greatest yeshiva.com. Rabbi Hecht, thank you 1,000 thank yous. Appreciate your time, your enthusiasm, and your message. We'll send out the recording. Tomorrow night, everybody, we'll learn some Parsha. Good night, good night, good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.